Guys, welcome to Falcon Central Radio Show on the Pro Football Central Radio Network. I'm Aaron Freeman, founder of FalcFans.com, one of your hosts. I'm joined by my co-host Scott Karasik at Sports Not. This week we are back to talk about the first week of Atlanta Falcons training camp with our good friend Jeanna Thomas, who writes for the Falcoholic and SB Nation. Can't have to throw in the SB Nation because Jeanna does a lot more than Falcons football over there. Welcome back to the show, Jeanna. I think this is your third or fourth appearance on here?
Third appearance, yeah, and thanks for having me, guys.
Well, you know, guys, you regulars that have watched or listened to this show know how we do it. We're going to go over some of the news, then we'll jump right in and give the floor to Jeanna to tell us what she's been observing at training camp, because unlike Scott or myself, she has actually been there every day so far to give those observations so she can really answer those questions. And, of course, as always, at the end of the show, we will answer all you guys' mailbag questions. But let's get the big news that dropped, I guess, yesterday with the Falcons signing Dwight Freeney to help with the pass rush. This is a move that has been a long time coming. The Falcons brought him in at the end of May, beginning of June for a visit, not really a workout, and they've been basically keeping a roster open for something, and we've been speculating for at least a couple of days, if not several weeks, about whether or not that roster spot was going to be filled with Dwight Freeney, and it was. So I guess, you know, I'll give Scott the floor, and then we'll go to you, Jeanna. But what are your thoughts on this move?
I think I'm shocked it happened this early. I didn't think anybody was going to sign Freeney until after the second or even third preseason game, just because he's an old guy and old guys don't like training camp. But I'm glad they signed him. I'm glad that they're going to get him in there for training camp. I'm glad he's going to – I mean, I don't really know if his role in the scheme is going to be too different than what he's been doing his entire career, which is line up in the 7, rush after the passer, or line up in the 9, rush after the passer. But other than that, I mean, I love the move. It's Dwight Freeney. I've wanted him in a Falcons uniform since 2002. So I love it.
Jeanna.
I love the move, too. And Freeney actually said after the season that he didn't want to wait too deep into training camp to sign with somebody because he didn't like the uncertainty. I think he wanted to know where he was going to be. He wanted to be able to get someplace and get settled. So I actually was surprised that they didn't sign him sooner. I really don't know what the holdup was. So anyway, I'm really excited that he's here. They are not bringing him in just solely as a mentor, but I think that that's really kind of an underrated aspect of what he brings to the table. If you watched any of All or Nothing, the Prime series featuring the Arizona Cardinals, one of the things that stood out to me about Freeney was just what a student of the game he is. And he was breaking down film about the Packers and was able to say exactly how he was going to exploit Don Barclay's weaknesses. And then he did. He had 3 sacks in that game. He just had a monster game against him. So it was really impressive. I think that he can come in and really teach Vic Beasley and some of the other young players a lot, and they're bringing him in to rush the passer. I mean, last season, I think he had 8 sacks, which is twice as many as the Falcons sack leader. So I don't think that you can discount how important that is. And even if he gets half that number, it's still the same number as the Falcons sack leader got last year. So I'm really excited about the move. I think it's great.
Well, here's hoping that this year the Falcons sack leader is about in that 10 to 12 range, and then combined with Freeney, you end up with like 16 to 17.
Yeah, absolutely. That's my expectation.
Yeah, Freeney has been a guy that I've been pushing for the Falcons to sign since 2013. Back when we first cut John Abraham, I really thought he was the guy that we should have gotten that offseason as opposed to OCU. Or now I'm not going to sit here and diss OC. He did fine for the 2 seasons that he played with us, but I do feel like we could have gotten a little bit more had we signed Dwight Freeney back then. And with the whole mentoring thing, I think it's a good move for the Falcons because I do feel like he can sort of teach Vic Beasley the finer points of that spin move, because one of the things that you noticed in Indianapolis when he was there for, 11 seasons or something like that, where you saw other guys like Raheem Brock and Robert Mathis also perfect the spin move. And it's just one of those things I don't know exactly how it works, but basically if you watch how that spin move works in practice every day, maybe you start to pick up and tweak it a little bit more and get down the finer points, and sort of that can be something that's added to Vic Beasley's repertoire. I think this is a move that helps the Falcons tremendously in terms of getting another guy opposite Beasley to sort of really sort of get pressure on the quarterback from the edge. I don't necessarily know if Freeney's going to be an every down sort of guy, and I question how many opportunities he'll get to rack up pressure. Just because when you look at Arizona last year, he didn't play a lot. He played about 20 to 25 snaps last year. But one of the things that helped Arizona a lot last year was because of how explosive their offense was, they got to play with leads a lot, so they could really pin their ears back late in games and sort of let Freeney be Freeney and get after her. And that's a big reason why he was so successful in Indianapolis, because of the Colts offense. And I don't necessarily see the Falcons offense being on the same level as the Peyton Manning offense or Bruce Arians offense this year, so he may not get quite as many opportunities to sort of just pin his ear back and get after the quarterback. But I do feel like whatever contributions he's going to bring to the table, as Jeanna suggested, is going to be a lot more than if we didn't have him on the team. So it's certainly a positive move for the Falcons, and we'll see how much that is represented in the production at the end of the year. Now, we got a couple of questions about Freeney specifically, and I guess this will allow us to sort of put a button on this issue with some people asking us a couple of questions. The first one is from Luke. He's at the Dirty Bird 1998 on Twitter. He asks, will Freeney be a third down specialist / rotational guy or an every down nickel player?
I don't think he's going to be an every down nickel player. I see him more as probably a situational guy. Just because I just don't know how much he realistically can contribute consistently, like with a high snap count.
I agree, Jeanna. I think if you're looking at it from a sort of number standpoint, your average team plays about 65 snaps in a game, and if there's about 65% of those snaps are nickel, which was about the league average last year, that roughly estimates to about 40 snaps in nickel per game. Mm-hmm. So I would probably guess you'd probably get, for every 2 snaps that Adrian Claiborne plays, you'd probably get 1 snap of Freeney. So that sort of breaks down on average to be about 25 for Claiborne and about 15 for Freeney per game.
Mm-hmm.
And
about right.
Yeah, you give or take 5 to 7 snaps off of that number. I think that's probably the range that you would basically expect for Freeney, somewhere between 10 and 20 every week. So we'll see how it goes.
I mean, that sounds about right to me, too. I'd agree. I don't see Freeney coming in unless it's like, oh, hey, it's 3rd and 8. They pretty much have to pass. Throw Dwight out there.
Yeah. Freeney's going to be a big part of the Falcons' equation to beat the Saints. I don't necessarily know if he's going to be a big part of their equation to beat the Rams or a run-first team like that. So it'll basically – I think Dan Quinn, they asked him a question today at training camp about what Freeney's role is going to be, and he's basically said it's going to depend on the different matchups. And in certain games, you'll see a lot of Freeney. In other games, you probably won't see as much of him. Our next question comes from XChuck1X. He asks, are we a year too late to actually benefit from the Freeney signing?
I mean, that's a fair question because he did have a good, solid year last year. But he wasn't really injured last year. He was pretty banged up the year before. I mean, I guess it just depends on how he's used and how good the offense is to where the Falcons are up those 14-0, 21-0s that you would need for a team to basically just say, hey, let's sell out and pass all the time.
Yeah, I mean, it is a question. He did have the big year last year. But the 2 previous years when he was in San Diego, he wasn't bad or anything, but he just wasn't getting a ton of sacks. So you do wonder if last year is sort of the 8 sacks from last year is the norm, or the average, I think, over the last 4 seasons has been about 5 per year. And he did miss like 3/4 of like 2013, I guess, with a quad injury. So you're right, Scott. It is a fair question. Is this a situation where we might be getting Freeney a year too late? Maybe. We'll find out. I still think he'll be able to contribute something. I don't know if we're going to get an 8-sack season from him, but I do feel like we'll get something from him. And we'll see how much that is. Okay, our last Freeney question is from Joshua Haymond at Wispa2000. He asks, with the addition of Freeney, how good will the Falcons pass rush look this year?
Aaron's always trying to make the players have the same last name as him. So now
pretty much, yeah.
Freeney.
Yeah.
I realized that when I said it. I was like, okay, yeah.
It's a good question. It's really hard to know. I mean, the pass rush has been so bad in recent years that I don't think it can get worse with Freeney. I think it has to get better. How much better? I don't know. It's, so much of it is, how is the secondary going to look? How is Keanu Neal going to settle into that strong safety role? How effectively are they going to cover to give guys enough time to get to the opposing quarterback? There are a lot of questions we have to answer, I think, in preseason probably before we can really get a sense of how much this one move will impact the pass rush.
I think people are kind of overblowing the one move, though. It's not just Freeney that was added this offseason. It was Freeney. It was better coverage linebackers like Devondre Campbell. I mean, it's all a piece of the puzzle. So when you've got Freeney, you've got Derek Shelby, you've got Courtney Upshaw, who he's not a great pass rusher, but in the base, he's probably a better pass rusher than Corey Bierman was. And a healthy Brooks Reed is probably a better all-around player than what Corey Bierman was. So those kind of things, they all add up together. As a whole, the pass rush should be better. Now, is it going to be NFL leading pass rush? Probably not. Is it hopefully going to break 30 sacks? I think it can.
Yeah, I think before this move was made, I think I had them probably predicting, pulling a number out of my butt about at 30 sacks. So, maybe Freeney can maybe add another 5 to that total. I think the key with Freeney, and now you have Freeney and Beasley on the edges. You have 2 speed rushers, really, that are primarily speed rushers. And so what that creates really is a situation where quarterbacks are going to be looking to step up in the pocket. So I really think a lot of Freeney and Beasley sort of improvements this year and Freeney's addition this year really depend on the interior rush getting home a lot more. And we know what Babineau is. He's tried and true. He's been basically the same guy for the last 4 years. He'll show up and be that guy. The questions are going to be what growth Grady Jarrett shows, what growth or what ability Derek Shelby has as an interior pass rusher. And so whether those guys, when we get into situations where quarterbacks are sort of stepping up in the pocket to avoid the speed rush from Beasley and Freeney on the edges, are they stepping up into the teeth of the other Falcon defenders? And that will basically determine, I think, whether or not this pass rush shows a huge amount of growth or just modest growth. I think that interior pass rush is going to hold the key to this season coming up, as opposed to the edges. Even though I'm not going to complain about the edge guys getting a lot of pressure either. Okay, so we touched upon Dwight Freeney. We got a couple of other roster moves that we want to touch upon, as we want to do on this show. A lot of minor issues, so I guess we'll just touch on them briefly to see if anything really stands out. The Falcons made some additions to their roster last Wednesday or last Tuesday, I guess it was, when they signed Corey Washington, Arthur Lynch. Then they later signed Chris King and F.A. Obata. I guess your guys' thoughts, do you think any of these guys have decent odds to make the 53-man roster, or are all these guys basically trying to earn a practice squad spot over these next couple of weeks?
Washington stands out just because of his size. He's really big. He's pretty fast for his size. His long arms. He's flashed a little here and there. I don't see him necessarily beating out somebody like Aldrick Robinson, who has looked more consistently good throughout camp. So, aside from that, I I haven't really seen anything to this point that makes me think that any of those guys will catch on the 53.
Scott?
Yeah. I mean, to me, if there's one guy out of all of those names that stood out, it's Arthur Lynch. Played at Georgia, was a solid receiver, was a good blocker. I think if there's a guy that could resurrect his career in Atlanta, it'd be Lynch. And I think it'd be as like the third guy. Or if the Falcons decided to keep 4 tight ends, it'd be, Hooper, Tammy, Toilolo, Lynch, as opposed to, 6 wide receivers this year.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the one guy that's interesting to me, I have no idea. I have very low expectations on what he'll do. But if he does show a couple of flashes, I do feel like maybe we could stash him on the practice squad and sort of try to develop him a little bit down the road is F.A. Obata, just because of you look at the length and the athleticism that he possesses, and he's extremely raw. He's basically just started playing football like 2 years ago. So it isn't, that's why the expectations are pretty low. Generally speaking, people that only play football for 2 years don't make NFL rosters. But if he does flash a little bit of developmental potential, maybe, Dan Quinn can take him on as a project to sort of develop, maybe, spend basically 2 years on the practice squad, and maybe, I don't know, by 2018 or something like that, we might have somebody that could be something, as with the Falcons, basically anybody that has any glimmer of pass rush ability is going to have a lot of hope and potential put into them from our fan base. So we'll see what happens with that. I'm looking forward to seeing what he can do, if he can do anything in preseason. But at this point, I probably think it's more of a good story, kind of like Brian Banks, than it is something that really has legitimate potential. But we'll see what happens. Now, the last real move that I think is worthy of at least mentioning is the retirement of Charles Godfrey. I don't think any of us really think this is a big deal, but do you think it really has any effect on sort of the Falcons' safety depth, or is this just sort of a guy that was on the bubble anyway and we just kind of know his fate sooner rather than later?
It's hard to say because Godfrey actually played pretty well for the Falcons in relief last year. He was a reliable veteran presence. The day after he retired, Quinn took the opportunity to thank him and acknowledge him and, for the time that he spent with the team. He was here when, the old regime brought him in and he stuck around and, he was not young when they brought him in. So I think that he played very well for the team. But he was definitely getting older, and they have some young safeties on the roster who I think will step up and fill that depth role. So I think it's fine, but I certainly wish him the best. He exceeded my expectations when he was here.
Yeah, I was expecting nothing out of him, and we got, solid special teams play and some depth out of it, so I thought it was worth it. In the end, though, it's what you need when you've got young guys like Sherrod Niesman. You've got a guy who can take over that more veteran safety role in Kamal Ishmael.
Mm-hmm.
So, when you've got Niesman, who's just an athletic freak back there who could probably compete for a free safety backup role. You got Terezi, who showed some good stuff last year. You got Ricardo Allen, who's the new leader. So, and then Keanu Neal, he was a captain at Florida, so it wouldn't be shocking, maybe not this year, but next year or the year after, see him as one of the leaders in the secondary. I think it was time for Godfrey to retire, and I don't think it affects the depth of the secondary, especially the safety position, as much as it would seem.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, people that are regular listeners of this podcast and other podcasts that I do, the Falcon Fans podcast, the official podcast of the Falcoholic, know that I'm always constantly harping on safety depth, and you need 3 safeties because safety is an injury-prone position. But it isn't necessarily that you need veteran safeties like Charles Godfrey. You just need guys that you know what their ability is, that you can trust. If we have to plug and play with this guy for a month at a time because William Moore or somebody else is out injured, we know what we're going to get with that guy. And I think with all the playing time that Kamal Ishmael has gotten over the last couple of years, and with the playing time that Robinson Therese was able to get last year, I don't feel like Godfrey was bringing a whole lot extra to the table in terms of depth-wise. I think his sort of value to the team was his experience playing both free and strong safety spots, getting a little bit of nickel cornerback experience going back to college and 2 years ago in Carolina, meant that he was sort of a versatile backup to have that you can sort of, if in the event of a catastrophic injuries on game day during your secondary, you could sort of throw him out there in multiple roles and be at least semi-comfortable with it. I do feel like some of these younger guys like Brian Poole and Niesman that Scott mentioned have the potential to sort of be developed into that same sort of capacity down the road. So I don't feel like the Falcons are losing a whole lot, but he is certainly a veteran player that you knew what you were going to get out of him. As Scott said, competent special teams ability, competent play on defense, and sort of he was basically a litmus test to see if guys like Niesman and Poole come in and outplay him in that, then you sort of like, okay, these guys are ready to be, contributors on an NFL team. But that's really about it. All right, Jeanna, this is where we get into the part where you get to talk to us and tell us what's been going on in training camp.
Okay.
I guess first I want to get some injury updates because, we've heard about injuries to Julio Jones and Tevin Coleman. Can you tell us anything that's been going on, if those injuries are serious or whatnot?
So Julio is back to full participation today, and that is what actually he was back to full yesterday. So he's fine. It was a tweak of indiscriminate origin. We have no idea. Dan Quinn won't tell us what it was because he doesn't have to. Julio, when Vaughn asked him, what the injury was, and he said nothing. I don't have an injury. So they're playing that one close to the vest, but he's fine. He's back to full participation. He really could have been back to full participation earlier. They were just taking it easy. Julio Jones only needs so many reps in training camp. Like, he's ridiculous. So he's fine. I wouldn't worry about him at all. Tevin rolled his foot, and this actually happened in yesterday's practice. One of my friends from one of the TV stations here in Atlanta noticed it, asked me after practice if I noticed it. I totally missed it. Everybody else missed it. And then today, Tevin was not in pads. He was in shorts and not participating. So then I knew something was wrong. So, yeah, Quinn said after practice that he did the rehab run today, and they think that he should be back in some limited capacity tomorrow. So it doesn't sound like it's serious. They're always going to take more time with guys, especially key players who are not really fighting for a roster spot. Like, we know that Julio has a roster spot. We know that Tevin has a roster spot, like, barring anything really crazy. So he should be back. They're going to take it really easy with them and make sure that they get them through camp and preseason healthy enough to contribute because these games don't count. So that's where those stand. But, yeah, I wouldn't worry about either of those.
Okay. Now, Jeanna, I know you've gone on record multiple times with all the radio and podcast appearances you've had the last couple of days talking about some of these players, but let's just pretend that some of our listeners or viewers haven't heard those things. Who are the players that have been the more prominent guys that have stood out to you so far in the first week of training camp?
So on offense, the one who has stood out to me the most is definitely Tevin Coleman. And the thing that has stood out to me is just his consistency, because that's something that you do not necessarily see a lot of in training camp. Guys go through bad stretches where they're dropping balls or where they just don't look as fresh or whatever. Tevin has looked just as good on every carry, every catch. I mean, the consistency is remarkable. And that's what suggests to me that he will be improved in the regular season. Because, again, that consistency is not something you necessarily see, especially in the early days of camp. So Tevin has really stood out. His hands have improved. He's improved as a receiver. He's running really strong. So I think that I'm really excited to see what he does once they hit the field for preseason action. Defensively, it's really been Campbell. I mean, as a rookie, a fourth rounder, he has far exceeded my expectations. When we talked to him for the first time, well, for me, the first time talking to him was rookie minicamp. And I was really impressed with his intelligence. And you can see how he has used that intelligence to acclimate. He really understands the scheme. And Adrian Claiborne told me today that even though the scheme looks simple, it's actually pretty complex. And so Claiborne said he was impressed with how the rookies have all absorbed the playbook and really understand what they're supposed to be doing. But for Campbell in particular, he covers like a cornerback. It is so crazy to me to watch a linebacker drop into coverage and not want to die, because he can actually do it. Like, he just looks phenomenal in coverage. And he looks good against the run, too. He's taking good angles to the ball. He seems to have really good instincts. I just really like what he brings to the table, and his speed and athleticism are such an upgrade. So he has definitely stood out on defense. Trying to think if there have been any other guys who really stood out. Alex Mack has impressed me. And again, you know, even when they're in pads, they're not really allowed to get after the quarterback. So you got to take it with a grain of salt, I guess, but he just seems so much more comfortable than Mike Person ever did, because he has always been a center and knows how to be a center. So I think that that's a tremendous upgrade. I'm really excited about that. A bunch of the different guys on offense, Jake Matthews, Julio, have told me what a difference it is to have him in there making the calls, just to have his experience and the stability there in the center of the offensive line makes a big difference. So I'd say he is another one who stood out. Keanu Neal definitely standing out, especially these once they put the pads on. Like, this kid is so aggressive and he hits so hard, and that's really what they need in that role. But he also plays really smart. He's got great instincts, and he's just, they've actually had to tell him to back off a little bit because he wants to hit a little bit too hard. And they've got to actually have the offense healthy enough to play once the season gets here. So that kind of aggression, though, I mean, you'd love to see it out of your strong safety. It's really necessary at that position. So he's standing out as well, especially since they put on the pads.
That was something that showed up in his college film. You could definitely see Keanu Neal just wanting to take people's heads off in college. And that's what we've been missing in Atlanta for a while.
Yes.
So Jeanna, going back a little bit to Devondre Campbell, we got a mailbag question from Luke, the Dirty Bird, 1998. He asks, which I think you probably answered, but let's get it official. Is Devondre Campbell hype an overreaction, or is it legitimate?
It's legitimate. It's very rare, and I'll say this about all of the rookies. I think that some of this is because of the pace that Dan Quinn runs practice, because it's very fast. I think that helps them acclimate to NFL speed. But, I mean, not only has Campbell adapted to NFL speed, he is running it faster than NFL speed, I think. Like, it's ridiculous. His athleticism is so – it's better than what we have typically seen from this Falcons defense, especially the linebackers. And he just knows how to use it. Like, he just instinctively knows how to use his athleticism to benefit him. I'm really excited about him. I really didn't – I mean, I remembered him from college because I obviously watch a lot of Big Ten ball. But, he wasn't a guy who necessarily stood out to me or jumped out at me in college. And I'm not like a draft guru or anything, so it's not like I watch hours of tape on these guys. So I was like, I'm not sure about this pick, but then he's been phenomenal. Like, I'm genuinely impressed. I don't know that I've ever been as impressed with a rookie.
I loved watching him in college. I absolutely loved watching him in college. You saw that speed on the field,
yeah,
and he was fun. He could cover a tight end, and that's why I was like, it's the one thing he does extremely well. And if the Falcons take him in the 4th or 5th round, that's why they're taking him, because he can cover a tight end.
Well, he can. I mean, he looks so natural dropping in coverage. He tracks the ball really well. He can cover Tevin Coleman, who's got really remarkable straight line speed. And he hangs with him with no problem. I mean, it's pretty incredible. And that's been a big need for the Falcons. They have needed linebackers who can at least adequately cover, and I think that he can cover excellently. I think that he's much better than adequate.
Okay. All right. So On that same note, a player that has not been creating quite as much buzz is the linebacker that was taken ahead of Devondre Campbell, which is sort of Deion Jones. Is that lack of buzz an indicator that he has not quite been performing up to par, or is that just basically because other players are standing out, he sort of gets lost in the shuffle?
I think that it's a combination of other players standing out and kind of outshining him. And I think that it's really important for fans to know that if a player isn't standing out at camp, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're doing poorly. It probably means that they're doing what they're supposed to do. Because a lot of times guys stand out, because especially younger players, because they're making mistakes. And Deion Jones hasn't stood out dramatically. Here and there, like you see his speed, you see the athleticism, he's picking it up. I think it's an adjustment to the middle linebacker position. But most of the time he doesn't stand out because he's doing what he's supposed to do. He's not having huge lapses. He's hanging in there. He's maybe not, shining in the position, but I think he's doing just fine.
Now, Jeanna, I'm curious, what are your thoughts on sort of some of these position battles, and if certain guys are sort of, putting their name in the hat to sort of help themselves make a roster spot? Let me start with wide receiver. I've heard a lot of good, positive things about Aldrick Robinson, as well as Justin Hardy, and obviously the big addition the Falcons made this offseason was Mohamed Sanu. Are those three of the guys that are really standing out at that position, and are there any other guys that sort of come to mind when you think about making a case for making the team?
Yeah, I would say if I had to do a wide receiver depth chart right now, it'd be Julio, Sanu, Justin Hardy, who has really progressed from last year. He's been very impressive. And then I would probably put Robinson fourth. I would put Weems fifth. And then if they would carry six, I would say Nick Williams or David Glidden. Glidden's a little bit smaller, but he's very fast. He has very good hands, and he's pretty athletic. So deceptively athletic, if you will. So, he's a white wide receiver. I got to make the white wide receiver jokes. So anyway, I would say that would be my wide receiver depth chart right now.
Okay. Let me see. What's the next position?
Fuller was kind of conspicuous, or conspicuously missing, I should say, on that one.
Who was?
Devin Fuller.
Oh, hell. Yeah, actually. And Fuller has been doing well with returns. He would have.
That could mean Weems is gone.
Huh?
That could mean Weems is gone.
It could mean Weems is gone. Boy, I would hate that, but yeah, it could. The thing is, they drafted Fuller to hopefully be able to take over that return role, and he's been doing well with that. And actually, he's been coming along as a receiver too. He missed a chunk of OTAs because of a hamstring, I think, so he was a little bit slow getting started, but he's been catching up pretty quickly and looks pretty solid. So yeah, good point. I totally left him off my list, and I probably shouldn't have.
Well, I think it's going to be interesting because I sort of agree with what you said, Jeanna, where basically his shot at making the roster was winning the return spot because he wasn't necessarily going to be counted upon to be an offensive contributor this year, given all the other players ahead of him that are just certainly, he's a former high school quarterback, so it's not as if he's been playing wide receiver for more than 3 or 4 years.
Right.
But I guess the question would be, has he stood out enough in terms of the offensive drills and whatnot, part of practice, to sort of maybe change that perception? But I guess if you sort of forgot him, then maybe the answer to that question is no.
Make a couple of really nice catches. So it's it's hard to say. I don't know that he has stood out enough to this point to really lock up a spot. So yeah, but he has been coming along. Like, you can see that he's getting better with the routes, having a better understanding of them. He's making some really nice catches, some nice plays and drills. So I really shouldn't have left him off. I guess I'll put him down there, battling for that 6th spot with Williams and Glidden. But it's a crowded position. It was a crowded position last year. That's why they ended up carrying 6. So we'll just have to see what happens.
So here's my. I'm gonna skip Aaron on this one.
Okay, appreciate it.
I'm just saying it. Tight end. How is Hooper looking?
Hooper looks great. I've been really genuinely impressed with him. He missed OTAs and minicamp because he returned to school to finish his degree. He has, I mean, that whole time, I guess, that he was talking to the tight ends coach every night, going through the playbook, working to learn it. And he really doesn't look behind at all. It's very impressive. When Trufant did that, Trufant came to camp and looked a step slow, which is interesting because he's obviously developed into a very good corner. Some of that was Trufant's work ethic, insisting that he wanted to go up against Julio or Roddy on every play during his rookie training camp. But as far as Hooper, he came in prepared. He came in understanding the offense. He worked really hard on his own time to get to that point, and he looks great. Where I'm most impressed with Hooper is the contested catch. He just is a really strong receiver. He needs to progress some as a blocker, and I still think that Tammy's going to be the number one guy. But Hooper has exceeded my expectations, especially to this point.
Okay. Now can I go, Scott? Okay. The other position, I want to ask you about the either side of the line, but I feel like until you get a little bit more padded practices, you can't really make a judgment on that. So I'll just switch to the cornerback position, where that's a lot more. That's one of the other position groups that's a little up in the air in terms of the depth. We know who the two starters are going to be, but there's been concern, I guess, over the depth at that position.
And that's
whether it's Jalen Collins or Akeem King or C.J. Goodwin or whoever. Has anybody really stood out to you so far in training camp?
So a few guys have stood out. DeMarcus Van Dyke definitely is standing out. That's a guy that they're looking at primarily on the outside. And Van Dyke is fast. He is really, really fast. I forget his 40 time, but I'm thinking 4.28. I mean, it was ridiculous.
I think that's about right.
Yeah, you're right there.
And he also has the size and the length that they love in an outside corner. The other thing that this is really interesting. Dan Quinn said that they're looking at him as a gunner on teams. And so, I mean, with that speed, that makes sense. But if he can contribute as a gunner on special teams, then I think he has a better shot of sticking on the 53. So that's something to definitely keep an eye on through the preseason, not just his performance at corner, but also on special teams, because that may be his ticket to the roster. Brian Poole, he gets burned some, but it's because he's so physical. And I think that the coaching staff probably loves that physicality. I think he just needs to learn the balance between being physical and actually effectively covering. So, and they're trying Poole in some different positions too. They, I think, like the potential of his versatility. So that's another thing to keep an eye on. And then Goodwin has played very well. Goodwin, if I'm not mistaken, is the converted receiver. And he has a really good understanding of routes, which makes sense. And he stood out in minicamp too, and has been pretty consistent through training camp. So Akeem King also, I mean, he knows the defense. He's very comfortable in it. I think that he's looked pretty good. So I would say those four guys are the main guys to keep an eye on. Definitely a couple of those guys will stick because they need the depth. And with Jalen Collins out 4 weeks for that dumb suspension, they definitely need somebody who can come in and contribute. So those are the guys that I'm keeping an eye on. I'm glad that they have so many who are standing out because it really is a position of need right
now. Would you say that it makes you less, I don't know if confidence is the right word, but do you think there's less of a chance so far with the Falcons sort of addressing that position at the end of training camp on the waiver wire, or is it still too early to tell?
I think it's still too early to tell because they're still installing. So, I mean, they haven't even installed the entire playbook on either side of the ball at this point. So I think that they're just going to want to get a more complete sense of what these guys have to offer and how they can feature them in the scheme and whether or not they can help the team win games. So I think we're going to have to get, probably through at least the first preseason game before we have a sense of can these guys really contribute.
Okay. Have there been any other players that you feel like deserve mentioning or that have stood out or not stood out to you?
Brooks Reed. I don't know if you guys saw the video that Atlanta Falcons posted today on Twitter, but like Brooks Reed is just getting after it. Like I don't even know who the lineman was, but man, he blew him up today. It's crazy. Brooks just looks really healthy and really tough, and he looks ready to go. And Brooks talked to me a little bit last weekend about how like competitive it is, and just I think that all of these young players fighting for roles, I think that everybody kind of feels the pressure of that competition, even if they're not directly competing with them for their own position. And I think that it's kind of fueling everybody to work a little bit harder and get after it a little bit more. So, but Brooks is standing out. He looks this offseason like they expected him to look when they signed him. And how I think he would have looked without the groin injury. So he's looked great.
Okay. Scott, I'll give you the floor if you have some other camp questions you want to ask Jeanna.
I'm really just wondering about the linebackers, and not the ones named Jones or Campbell, but the other ones, the slow ones.
The slow ones.
The slow ones. Weatherspoon, Warlow, and Wheeler. The three dubs.
It's been pretty interesting to watch what they're doing with Warlow, because they've moved him to Will sometimes, and I think that they're trying to get a sense of how versatile of a backup can he be, because I do think that they expect Warlow to be relegated to a backup role, which I don't think is bad. An undrafted free agent out of Delaware, to be able to come in and start the way that he did and rack up so many tackles, he's a good special teamer. He'll still get plenty of opportunities to contribute. The coaching staff loves him. But, Warlow looks good for Warlow. Warlow is just slow. So it's been interesting to see them kind of shift him around. He has the best attitude about it. Like, Warlow will do anything the coaching staff asks him to do. So I think that's going pretty well. Spoon has impressed me. He looks healthy, and he looks ready to go. And, also slow, much slower than the rookies. But he's definitely going to be able to contribute this year. And it's really nice to have him back. It's nice to have his energy back on the field. That's been really fun to watch.
It's bad that you say he's slow now, because I remember when he came out, he was so fast.
Yeah, he's faster than Warlow. I might be faster than Warlow. I'm not. That's a lie. But yeah, he looks good and he looks healthy. So that's, I think, best case scenario for the Falcons. And I think he'll contribute in a rotational role. And I think that that's, in his best interest in terms of preserving his health and having him available for the whole season.
Okay. Scott, you got any more? Or you want to jump into these mailbag questions?
I think it's time for the mailbag.
Okay. Well, Jeanna, you answered a couple of these. Let's see, what's the first one that we can ask that you haven't answered so far? Okay. This one also comes from Luke at the Dirty Bird 1998. He says, who's starting at Leo in camp so far?
Brooks Reed is one thing that you have to. Brooks Reed is getting a lot of the starting reps, a lot of the first team Leo reps. One of the things that you have to know about Dan Quinn and his staff, though, is that they're going to plug different guys in with the first team. It makes it kind of hard to get a read on who the starters are at any given position, especially at a position that's kind of up in the air, because they want to really figure out who's the best for that role. So you'll see different guys rotating in there quite a bit. Same thing with right guard, which is another one of the bigger position battles. I would say, especially the way that Reed's been playing, I think that Reed is probably going to end up being the starter at Leo. But, the reason that Quinn rotates different guys in with the first team is because he wants them to see how they look with starters and to see if they're able to hold their own and to see if they're ready to actually be starters. And also it pushes them to get better. So you'll see different people rotating in, but I think that Reed is probably the favorite at this point to win that role.
Okay. We got a question from ATL Justin Tyler. He says, who are the 4 D linemen playing when the Falcons are in nickel? Vic, Babs, Shelby, and Clay? Question mark.
For the most part. And again, you're going to get different guys rotating in there. You'll see Jared in there. You'll see Hageman sometimes. I'm trying to think of who else they rotate in there. They've even had Upshaw in there at different times. Trying to think if I'm missing anybody who's been in with the first team. I probably am. But again, they're rotating guys in to see how they fit, to see how they can best feature them, to see how they work. Which selection of guys is going to be the most effective up front. So I would say, yeah, and those would probably be my expectations. Well, it'll be interesting to see how they work Freeney and the stuff when he gets here too. But yeah, I think that those guys and then the other guys that I mentioned have rotated in, some too with the first team and probably some other guys that I'm forgetting, but they switch it up quite a bit.
Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting to see what the Falcons do, because I think what they start off, well, really a lot of the positions on defense, I think what they begin the season at week 1 is not necessarily what they are going to end the season at. And I think a lot of this season is really part of the rebuilding process. I know they don't want to use the R word, but I do feel like with a lot of these positions, they're trying to get the best mix and match guys out there on the field. And probably week 1 you'll probably see Vic, Babs, Shelby, and Claiborne as the 4 main guys in the nickel. You'll probably see Reed, Shelby, Jackson, and Jared as the 4 main guys in the base. But by the time we get to week 5 or week 10, and certainly week 17, we could see 3 or 4 new guys in any of those positions. So, and I think that goes to the linebacker core. I think that goes to potentially the cornerback position. Hopefully, we won't have that sort of shakeup on the offense, because you kind of want consistency on that side of the ball. But defensively, I do think this is sort of a work in progress, and I think the Falcons' goal by the end of the season is to sort of cement some of these guys into, okay, this is exactly what this guy's going to do for the next 3 to 5 years, God willing.
It's nice that this coaching staff is continually assessing, so you will see those changes, and they'll make the changes because it works better on the field. So that's something that we didn't necessarily see under Mike Smith, so I think that that's an improvement.
Okay, Jeanna, you touched a little bit on this, but I guess maybe Scott might feel like he can weigh in on this one as well. At Vienna Falcons asked, thoughts on Paul Warlow, a.k.a. PJ, being possibly moved to a weak side linebacker. Can he suck less there, or is it pretty much the same position?
Don't put him in coverage. Let him play in the base as a middle linebacker or as a weak side linebacker. Just let him play in base or in obvious run situations. Let him be basically that thumper that he is at this point. And then, we know what Warlow is. He's a good leader. He's a good guy. He's a clubhouse guy. But at this point, he's Mike Peterson circa 2012.
Okay. I had to mentally check to see if Mike Peterson was still on the team until 2012, but by that point, it didn't really matter that much. So I get what you're saying.
Yeah, he's the 4th linebacker out of 3.
I think the interesting thing about the weak side and middle linebacker positions is, from a run fit sort of standpoint, there's not really that much difference between them. It's really about which gap assignment that they have in a given play, just based off the normal sort of standard, run play or whatnot. And from a skill set standpoint, it doesn't really matter whether you're a middle linebacker or a weak side linebacker in this scheme, because people got to understand the 4-3 under is basically kind of like a one-gap version of the 3-4 defense. So it's really 2 inside linebackers as opposed to the sort of traditional 4-3 stack where you have a middle linebacker and a weak side linebacker, and that differentiates. Where those 2 positions really tend to differentiate is more in coverage, with the middle linebacker being more often than not responsible for the middle zone over the middle of the defense, any crossing routes that come over that area or any checkdowns to the running back. That's his responsibility. The weak side linebacker, more often than not, will also play some middle zones, but for the most part is often asked to cover the flat. And I think that's less of an area to be asked to cover more often than not. depending on the alignment and where the football is. But you often have the sideline as an extra, is used as an extra defender, so to speak. And so it helps a little bit that you're not necessarily being asked to be as rangy as the middle linebacker. And I think that's been a little taxing on Paul Warlow. So if he does move to weak side linebacker, I do think it could benefit him in coverage somewhat. And people should also remember that Warlow did start at weak side linebacker at the beginning of 2013 when Sean Weatherspoon was hurt before the Falcons decided to bench Akeem Dent and move Warlow to middle linebacker. But that move was my recollection, only happened after Weatherspoon came back healthy and they could move Warlow then. So he's not new to the position, so it wouldn't be that big an issue for him to move there if the Falcons think their middle linebacker play with Deion Jones is better. All right. Okay, Matty Shack 11 asks each of your thoughts on surprise cuts and surprises to make the roster.
I'm going to give one surprise cut and then one surprise to make the roster. The surprise cut, I think, is going to be Tyson Jackson, mainly because everybody's like, no, I don't think Tyson. But the more I look at the talent they've brought in, the more that I look at his fit, his role, he seems like he's going to be the odd man out. Like, would you rather have Hageman and Shelby on the field and base, or would you rather have Tyson Jackson and Rashid Hageman on the field and base? I almost would rather have Hageman and Shelby on the field just to have the better pass rusher if you're going to get pretty much the same kind of play against the run. So I think Tyson Jackson is going to be that surprise cut. The guy who I think surprises and makes the roster, I'm going to go with C.J. Goodwin. Just because I think he's going to do something on special teams. The guy that tall, that fast, that big, running down the field is going to try and hit people like a safety. So let's let him hit some people like a safety.
I got two surprise cuts. The first one is not someone that I think will get cut, but it wouldn't totally shock me if they got cut. I would say Andy Levitre. Just if the Falcons really like what either Mike Person or especially Wes Schweitzer do this summer, and for whatever reason Levitre just doesn't bring it, which I don't expect will happen, but I think there's at least a modicum of a possibility that the Falcons could cut him and save some money against the cap. The other person I would say is Courtney Upshaw. I don't necessarily know if he's a huge surprise, just because I don't think people were like, he's definitely going to make the team. But you hear reports that he's now being asked to play a little bit on the interior defensive line, and I think that's either a situation where Dan Quinn has seen something special in him. There's locked in, like that guy's a defensive tackle all the way from the beginning, or I think it's a situation, particularly with the Freeney signing, where the Falcons are sort of looking for a role for him to, because with Brooks Reed playing the Leo in the base, with Freeney now splitting reps with Claiborne in the nickel, and with Beasley and Philip Wheeler playing Sam linebacker, there really isn't a clear spot for Upshaw to make the team. And so given that he's a little bit heftier, he's probably about the same size as Jonathan Babineau, maybe they sort of feel that he can provide some interior pass rush, and we'll see what happens. But I think he's a guy that really needs to step up in a big way to sort of solidify any roster shot he has. Jeanna, do you have any surprises that you expect?
I would say my surprise cut would probably be Eric Weems, and maybe that's not a huge surprise, but I just think the receiver is a crowded position. Weems is getting older. I love Weems. It would make me very sad, but I think that he may be supplanted by some of these younger receivers, especially if Tevin Coleman or Devin Fuller can kind of solidify that returner role. Also, Tyson Jackson, I agree, just because I think that they have some better options, some more effective, more athletic options. And so I think that they would still save money. He would still be like a post-June 1st cut, wouldn't he?
Oh yeah, that's
Yeah.
why they did the post June 1st cut. Is if a guy came in overweight in camp
Uh-huh.
and just like screwed up and wasn't worth it anymore, you could cut him and
Yeah.
then save money this year and next year.
Okay, perfect. That's what I thought. So I think that he could also make sense. Surprise guy to make the roster. I'm gonna go with DeMarcus Van Dyke. I love the idea of him being a gunner, and I think that he actually has performed pretty well at corner. So I like what he can do. So that's the guy that I've kind of got my eye on as someone, one of these fringe guys who could catch on the 53.
Okay.
Aaron, I just want to take a second. You notice that when you said something about Upshaw sliding inside, he's about the same size as Babineau.
Don't say it, Scott.
It made me think about what happened in Oakland with Rod Coleman. He had a similar situation. He was on a cheap contract, and they were trying him out as an end, and it didn't work, and then they put him in a 3 technique, and we're like, wait, this is where he's supposed to play. So maybe, hopefully, Upshaw can do it.
Okay. I thought you were going to say something else since we were on the subject of surprise cuts. So. Okay.
Well, I mean, Babineau could be cut, but it's unlikely considering he's making like $1 million and that's it. He wouldn't save really any money.
It's unlikely because he's the greatest football player to ever walk the face of the earth. That's what's unlikely about it.
He must be good.
Our next question comes from Andrew Schauwaller. Are you guys nervous about how many interceptions Matt Ryan is throwing in camp? Do you guys feel the interceptions are more on Ryan or the receivers not knowing the routes?
As a matter of fact, let me revise my surprise cut. I think it's going to be Matt Ryan because of all the training camp interceptions. Okay, no, I'm not worried a bit about the interceptions in camp. And I'll tell you, some of it's, I think that most of it is just timing between Ryan and the receivers. And that's not surprising. That's why they have practice. So today they actually looked much smoother and much better. So you're starting to see it come together. It doesn't concern me even a little bit. It's just getting the timing down, getting the chemistry down. They're going to be fine. I'm not worried, not even a little bit.
I would rather Ryan be intercepted by Keanu Neal and Robert Alford and Ricardo Allen and Desmond Trufant in camp a lot, and then come the season 6-7 interceptions than anything crazy. Let him get the interceptions out now, being aggressive, trying to see what limits he really can push, and then go from there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think this is sort of, part of my sort of agenda with dissing the front office. But I do think that a little bit of this is a symptom of sort of the Falcons' sort of team-building philosophy over the last 7 years, where basically Matt Ryan had the opportunity to play with the same receivers for basically the first, 6-7 years of his career. And then all of a sudden he's being asked to sort of integrate all these new guys because just for a large chunk of time, the Falcons really didn't add that many wide receivers to their roster. So he wasn't able to slowly sort of build that rapport and that continuity with those guys. So I feel like if it is a timing issue, as Jeanna says, it's going to have some growing pains. I don't know how long they last. Hopefully they end in the month of August and stop at that point. But it is one of those things where you look at the last 2 seasons where last year with Hester being injured and basically with Roddy being not utilized in the offense, and the additions of Hankerson and Nick Williams and Tammy, a lot of his receivers were brand new. That may be the case again this year with Sanu. He's gotten a little bit of a rapport with Hardy now, with Robinson and Fuller as well. So, these are sort of the growing pains that sort of happen when you have a veteran quarterback working with brand new receivers that he doesn't really know. And, bottom line is he knows Julio Jones. So I guess that's the one that's really important. So we'll see how that goes. Speaking of the wide receiver group, our friend, air quotes, Jalen Muhammad asks if Sanu and Hardy become great 2s and 3s, how far do you think the offense goes? And Gina, how is Hoops going to help us out?
I think that if Sanu and Hardy are solid as far as the number 2 and number 3 receivers, because Ryan didn't really have a solid number 2 or number 3 receiver last year, I think the offense will take a big step forward. So I'm pretty excited about that. Sanu, drops here and there, but for the most part, looks like he's getting his chemistry with Matt Ryan down. He's still learning the routes, he's still learning the timing, and he's still kind of learning the culture and fitting in to the offense. So I think he's coming along. Hardy has taken a big step forward. He's been really impressive. So I'm excited about those two. Hooper, again, is really impressive, and where he impresses me is the contested catch. He's able to control it all the way to the ground with guys just all over him. So I think he's going to be really good in terms of just adding another dimension and another reliable receiver. So I'm excited about what he brings to the table.
Okay. Yeah, I think for this one, I'm kind of reminded of the old Falcons offenses under Mike Mularkey in terms of sort of what the expectations are for the sort of style the offense is going to be, which is a lot of running on early downs, and then they get into those 3rd and 4s and 3rd and 5s, and they're sort of relying on somebody stepping up and moving the chains. And in those years, it was really Roddy and Tony, and then you got the occasional. I mean, Michael Jenkins was a little underrated in terms of his ability to move the chains on 3rd downs and whatnot, particularly towards the end of his tenure in Atlanta. And I think that's sort of the style that the Falcons want to be a little bit, with a strong, healthy running game. And then, when teams are focusing on Julio, then they can sort of convert those makeable 3rd downs with Sanu and Hardy, who are going to probably be reliant to run a lot of the shorter and underneath routes as opposed to stretching the defense. And then that will create opportunities for Julio downfield, because far too often last year, even when the Falcons were successful, they were too reliant on Julio in those short and intermediate plays to sort of get the easy completions, those 5, 6 yard, 8 yard completions.
And advantage of his full skill set.
Yeah, and with Julio, he's such a dynamic player that if you're gonna, because I remember that Giants game where Julio was relatively quiet for the until he made that big play at the end of the game, because there was a lot of screens, a lot of short passes, and for a team like the Giants, they will be happy to concede 8 yard completions to Julio Jones, because the thing that is scary about Julio is his ability to get those big chunk yardage, the 20, 30, and 40 yard plays. So if Sanu and Hardy can sort of pick up that, the 8 to 10, 8 to 12 yard completions on the offense, and allow Julio to sort of be the super scary, predator of opposing secondaries that he is certainly capable of being, that's where you see the Falcons passing game making tremendous leaps going forward. So that's the plan. We'll see how it works. I think Hardy can be that guy. People probably know I'm not as big a fan as Sanu on that issue, but we'll see what happens. Okay, we got another one from Jalen. He asks, what needs to happen for us to have a good record? Or should we #show little merit for Garrett, referring to Myles Garrett, the defensive end for Texas A&M?
The defense needs to get a pass rush.
Yes.
The offense needs to play consistently and run the ball consistently. Alex Mack's addition needs to be not just a great pass protecting center, but really get everybody on the same page when it comes to rundowns too. As a center, line calls go both ways, forward with the run game, backward with the passing game. And if he can really make, that one call, that 2 call, where he goes, oh, you know what, we should have this one thing that we do differently, and communicate it with his offensive lineman. I feel like that was the biggest issue with the offense last year, was the line calls. And if Matt can do that and really make that much of a difference, this offense could score 30 points a game, and that would be the Falcons get going, 10-6, 11-5, is if they do score those 30 to 35 points a game.
Yeah, I've said various times they need to run the football, they need to get a good pass rush. I think it really boils down to, if you're going to boil it down to one thing, the main thing that needs to happen for the Falcons this year because of the level of competition they're playing, particularly with they're playing some of the best defenses in the league, some of the best defensive lines, some of the best pass rushes, some of the best run defenses. One of the issues the Falcons have always had over the last several years, and I can't think of the last time this wasn't the case, probably 1998 maybe, where the Falcons need to be able to go up against top teams that are known for winning in the trenches, and the Falcons need to start winning in the trenches. They need to not be in a position where we're watching, like even in 2012 when the Falcons were playing great football, we were watching Tyson Clabo and Sam Baker and Todd McClure and all those other guys get their butts kicked on a weekly basis, and we were winning despite that because of how good Julio and Roddy and Tony were that year, and Matt as well. And so we were basically winning in spite of the fact of that. I don't think we have that sort of talent in our passing game. Regardless of how good you think Sanu or Hardy's going to be, he's probably not going to be Roddy White or Tony Gonzalez from 2012 in terms of their ability. So it really does put a lot more emphasis on the offensive line to be able to go up against teams like Los Angeles, Seattle, Arizona, Carolina, and not be pushed around like we have regularly been these last several years. And I think if you're turning on NFL Network or you're turning on ESPN and they're breaking down previewing Falcon games, and they're talking about how great the offensive line and how the Falcons have one of the best offensive lines in football, that's probably going to lead to the Falcons having a very good record. If they're not saying that, then I think we're going to see some struggles this year. So it really does boil down to the Falcons not being the team that they've been for several years and getting their butts kicked in the trenches this year. Jeanna, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree actually with what both of you said. I do think that protecting Matt Ryan and being able to run block effectively, being able to win at the line of scrimmage is fundamentally important for this offense. And I think that if the offensive line is stable, which it hasn't been over the past few seasons, I think that that's going to help cut down on the turnovers because I don't think that Ryan's going to be so antsy. And just not under the same amount of pressure that he's been under. I also think that they really do have to bring pressure against opposing quarterbacks, and it's something that they have not done with any consistency for as long as I can remember. So I really think that that has to change next year, especially in a division where you're going up against three very good quarterbacks for 6 of your games. So I think that they really have to get after opposing quarterbacks this year. Get the ground game going. That's something that they've needed to do. If you look back at Matt Ryan's early years when Michael Turner was in his prime, Ryan was so good in part because Turner took so much pressure off of him. And I think that that's really necessary. And they have 2 very good running backs on the roster. And I think that, those 2 can get it done as long as they block effectively for them. So I think that they have the tools and the personnel to actually improve their record this year. It's just a matter of getting those things done.
Okay. Our last question comes from Andrew Shawwaller. It's about Matt Ryan. He says, does Matt Ryan reach 30 or more touchdowns this year?
I think so. I think last year was an anomaly. I think that one of the underrated things about changing schemes this time around, and I don't know if people know this, but like when Dirk Cutter came in, the scheme was very similar to Malarkey's, and they kept all of the terminology the same. So the offense didn't have to learn all new terminology. The same terms meant the same things in Cutter's offense as they did in Malarkey's offense. In Shanahan's offense, all of the terminology is different. So now some of the terms that they're using to call some plays meant something totally different in the previous scheme. And so I think that we saw a lot of communication issues, and I think that we saw a lot of misunderstandings on the field because guys were still trying to wrap their heads around the terminology. They've had another full offseason to master it. I think that in and of itself is going to give us some improvement, which is very important. So, yeah, I think that last year Ryan's performance was an anomaly. I don't think that he's, a top-tier quarterback necessarily. He's not going to be Peyton Manning or Tom Brady. But I think that he is a very, very good franchise quarterback, and I think that he has every ability to help this team win a lot of games up to and including a Super Bowl. They just have to improve those aspects that we already discussed. And yeah, I do think that Ryan bounces back this year and can get back up above, 4,000 yards, 30 touchdowns.
I guess I'm the one who thinks that he's a little bit better than that. I think when you do go from that Earhart-Perkins system that he was in, that Cutter and Malarkey are on, that terminology, that's a great point that Gina's making, is that terminology is absolutely night and day, just completely different. It's like going from French to Chinese.
Mm-hmm.
They're not even close to related. We're going from like Malarkey to Cutter is like going from French to Spanish. You're like, oh, okay, some of this is the same. So, that's the best way to compare it is you just really, you have to learn. Matt Ryan had to learn Chinese basically, and now he's kind of got it down. And I could see him going for 35, 40 touchdowns this year if Sanu is what his contract says he's with. If Austin Hooper actually, if Austin Hooper is the red zone guy that we think that he can be, I think that this could be a big year for him. And if Coleman and Devontae just end up being great receiving options in the red zone. Because sometimes being in the red zone, all you have to do, you're at the 15, you're on that screen, Tevin breaks it for a touchdown. Yeah. Devontae breaks it for a touchdown. That's not asking too much. They did it last year.
Yeah, I think with this question specifically, I don't expect Matt Ryan to get 30 touchdowns just because he's only done it once in his career, and that was in 2012. And that was a very pass-heavy offense that didn't run the football. And I think when you sort of break it down in terms of what like we saw a lot last year, I expect us when we get into the red zone, we're going to run the football to Devontae, and that's one of the reasons why Devontae had so many touchdowns last year. So I feel like that's going to be sort of the plan. And so the way for Matt Ryan to really sort of get his touchdown count up is going to depend on him being able to get a bunch of big plays, because the issue the Falcons had a lot last year was one of the reasons why they ground down in the red zone is they couldn't get those big scoring play touchdowns like they've gotten in the past, where Julio converts it, turns it a 45-yard pass into a touchdown. So I think it's possible for Matt Ryan to get over 30 touchdowns this year, but it's going to really depend on basically the running game being as potent as people hope it can be, being one of the top running teams in the league, and really opening up that play-action passing game to really open up those big plays down the field for the Sanus, for the Julios, and sort of getting those chunk yards touchdowns that were really sorely missing from the offense last year. It's possible. I wouldn't predict it. I think he's probably going to get what he usually gets, which I guess is like 26 or 27, 28 touchdowns. That's probably where he'll probably top out. But adding a couple more, it's only like, you're only like 3 or 4 more from that, so that's possible. But I wouldn't predict it, but I think he'll certainly do better than 21. I hope he does better than 21 than he did last year, so we'll see what happens. Okay. Well, Jeanna, I think that's it for the mailbag, and we want to thank you for joining us tonight and answering our questions about training camp. And I'm sure you will be back out there in the coming days and weeks, sweating and complaining about your hair.
I will. Look at my hair; it's really bad today. Like, it's so humid. I can't do anything about it. So, yeah, actually, this is like a live hair update. It's all bad.
I'm glad I'm a guy.
Yeah, I have no hair, so it's all good to me. So, Jeanna, we will look forward to those hair updates live on Twitter, as well as your very good insights on the Falcons during training camp. And what do you have on deck over at the Falcoholic and SB Nation?
Okay, I have a few things coming up. Tomorrow, I'm going to be on 680 The Fan on front row with Steak and Finn and Sandra. So I'll be on at 9:45. I was going to go on at 9:30, and then I got a text from the producer, and I got bumped back to 9:45 because they have Chipper on. And I'm like, well, I can't really get mad about that. So I'll be on there tomorrow morning if anybody wants to tune in. At the Falcoholic Facebook Live mailbag tomorrow night. If you want to see me sweaty on camera again, you can tune in for that and ask your questions live while it's going. On Sunday, David Walker, Falcoholic DW, is coming out to camp with me, and we're going to do some fun things. We're going to do some different things with video, and we're probably going to do a Facebook Live from camp. So that's something for people to keep an eye out for, too.
Okay. And people, you guys can find Jeanna on Twitter at Jeanna Thomas. That's Jeanna Thomas. And Scott, didn't you want to ask Jeanna something about Pokemon Go before we got out of here?
Oh yeah. You find anything good at Flowery Branch?
Huh?
You finding anything good up at Flowery Branch?
You know, not much. Just because I'm so busy when I'm there, like I keep planning to walk around and catch stuff. When I pull it up, I see that there are things that I haven't caught yet. So I know that I should, but I've just been so busy when I've been there. So I'm hoping to, like on Sunday, when I don't have to get to work right after camp, I'm hoping that I have more time to like walk around and catch them all. That's my plan.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hey, I mean, my decks ain't looking that great either. The beauty of a full-time job, right?
Yeah. Well, I just want to shout out my best friend who caught Pikachu this week, and when she texted me a screen cap, I yelled so loud that I woke up my dog. So I'm very into Pokemon Go.
They're like all over the place here.
Huh?
They're all over the place here.
Oh, are they? I've got to get down to Atlanta because I'm kind of in a Pokemon Go desert. There were kids in my neighborhood playing fairly recently, and I went outside and I was like, any Pokemon in my yard is my Pokemon. Please get out of my yard. You cannot catch the Pokemon in my yard. And they thought I was joking, and I wasn't. I was not joking at all. And I made them leave. I'm an adult.
Barely.
Spiteful.
What a fun way to end the show. With me letting everyone know that I'm actually 12.
Very spiteful.
So anyway, on that note.
Well, thank you for sharing that with Jeanna. You just went down like 2 pegs in my book, but okay, that's fine. Scott, you got anything on deck at Sportsnot, and where can people find you on Twitter?
You can find me on Twitter at Karasik S, and then Sportsnot. I really don't have anything on deck right now. I kind of write when I feel like it, which is nice at this point.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know what's coming up next for me at FalcFans.com. I'll think of something in the coming days or weeks. You can find me on Twitter at FalcFans. If you guys want to ask the mailbag question, you can use the hashtag FalconsMailbag. You can tweet at Scott or myself. You can tweet at the show's Twitter handle at FalconsPFC. Please subscribe to us on iTunes. You can get the link to the iTunes page over at ProFootballCentral.com. Please rate us and review us on iTunes. That helps other people find us. And certainly subscribe to us on YouTube and do all that jazz. And we'll be back next week to talk more Falcons training camp. And I guess we'll be gearing up for the first preseason game.
Finally.
Right? Against the Redskins, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep. Finally.
Yeah. So we'll talk about that, and we'll be back next week, guys.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Jeanna.
Thanks, Jeanna.
Thank you.